that was my letdown about Santi. But everybody has to be let down at some age. I can remember doing that with my son a couple of years back, and we just made the decision to do it so we wouldn't be. He believed up until he was 11, and we had to sit him down and tell him because he was going into middle school, and we didn't want him being made fun of, you know.
Right.
So anyway, so that was Christmas morning. We would get up and Colette and I would we would play with our presents. Then they weren't wrapped, and then later when everybody else got up, then we would have shared a few family presents. You know, we would have bought Dad. My gift to my father would have been like a pair of socks, or we smoked a packet of Players. You know, or if you had enough, you'd buy 2 packs of Players. You know, and you would have gotten something tiny for your mother. And I don't think that I don't remember buying presents for my sisters or brothers. I can't remember. Maybe when we got a little older, because I left there at 18 and they were all gone. The older ones were all gone. So they probably brought us presents then when they got a little bit older, but I don't remember getting too many presents. And then, of course, you got ready for the dinner. You helped your mother set the table, and all the Waterford crystal came out and all the silver came out. Once a year came out. And, of course, in preparation to that, you would have had to polish all the silver and clean all the Waterford crystal by hand. You know, you didn't have a dishwasher, and so you had to be very, very gentle and wash them one at a time, because if you broke one, my father's famous saying was, if you break one of those, you can leave the country. And I think he meant it, you know. So we were petrified. We were literally petrified to break any of that stuff. And then we had the good china as well. They came out, little tiny cups, you know, the china that you could see through. They were paper thin, and if you poured a cup of tea in it, it was cold in seconds. It didn't retain the heat. But anyway, it all came out for Christmas Day, and the white linen was laid out. And so it was, I think, the only time, that and Easter were the only days we ever ate in the dining room. The rest of the time it was in the kitchen. And you know, it was the usual big spread, you know, turkey soup to start with, and, you know, turkey and ham with the stuffing and the roast potatoes and the gravy and the works. And then you had lovely plum pudding afterwards, you know, the one that you set on fire. My mother would set it on fire, and you'd have either custard or whipped cream with it. And she always made this beautiful Christmas cake. She would make them for a lot of people. Her own sisters and brothers and neighbours would ask her to make her Christmas cakes, because she made them in September for Christmas, full of booze, of course, and they were just ready at Christmas time. They were just the right, you know, amount of flavour with the booze thrown in, and she iced it incredibly. I guess, you know, work of art. She always did every single one different, and they were just so beautiful, and it tasted fantastic. So that was it, and that was the one day that we did get soda. We never had, and we wouldn't have called it soda. What did we call it? Anyway, we may have gotten Coke, but I think, no, it was red lemonade. Red lemonade we got on Christmas Day, and I can remember, and they bought the red lemonade as mixers for drinks. So whatever they put in with the whiskey and red lemonade, or whatever it would have been, we would go in and we would sneak some of the lemonade. And there was white lemonade and red lemonade, and we would sneak it. And I always remember saying, "Don't take that, because, you know, that's for the visitors on St. Stephen's Day." And then, of course, you'd always have a tin of biscuits that somebody gave you, so you'd always go in and rob the biscuits. And so that was Christmas Day, and we always sat down to watch a great movie. You know, that was the one day that The Sound of Music or Oliver or something, you know, real classic was on, and you just couldn't wait for that Christmas movie, and we all sat around and watched it. You know, all 9 of us poured into the small little room, and, you know, the black and white TV and the fireplace going, and that was Christmas Day. And then St. Stephen's Day was a big day. I love St. Stephen's Day.
Can you tell me about
Yeah. St. Stephen's Day was the day that you got to go on the wren, which is spelled, you know, it's like the bird, the wren, W-R-E-N. And apparently, I didn't realize this until later, that this was a tradition that was more renowned in the country areas. Like in the cities, they didn't do this. In Dublin or Navan, they wouldn't have done this. But in the countries, it still lived on. In a very small way, it lived on. And you'd get all dressed up. You'd wear, raggedy clothes, and you'd blacken out your face, and you were trying to do it so that people wouldn't recognize you. You put a hat on, or if you had a mask, you'd wear a mask. And so you'd go door to door, and I did it with maybe my younger sister and some friends. We'd say, "Come on, let's go on the Wren." So you'd go to each door and you'd knock on it, and you'd sing maybe a song, and then they'd come out and they'd give you some biscuits or a cup of tea and maybe some soda that they had. Or if you were lucky enough, they'd give you money. So, of course, our houses were so few and far between. You wouldn't get around to too many houses. I want to say you'd get to maybe 10 houses, 10 or 20, because you do maybe 2 miles, walk around and do it. And then when my brother got a little older, he was smart. He knew then that I was a good singer and that, people, he could make money off me. So he sat me on the crossbar of his bike, and he brought me door to door to sing. He never opened his mouth, and I would sing at every single door, and I would make all this money. And we split it, I think, 60-40. I'm pretty sure of that, 60-40. And I can remember it was pitch black, and we were at our neighbor's house that was very close to Motley's Wood. And I can remember him saying, "Come on, we're going to go over here on the way to Wilkinstown. We'll go through the woods." And I said, "No, I'm not going through Motley's Wood." I was still young and I was petrified. "No way am I going through Motley's Wood. Come on, we'll get through it. I'll put you up in the crossbar and we'll get through it really quick, really quick." And then I can remember our neighbour Esther saying, "Oh, you'll be fine, you'll be fine." He was saying to her, "Go on, tell her she'll be okay." So I sat on that that bike, and we went through it together. And I can remember I probably prayed the whole way through, "Please, please, Lord, keep me safe, keep me safe." And we got through it and sang it at all these houses and came back home. We made loads of money. I probably made £40 that night. And of course, he got half of it, probably more than half of it. So, but it was a big night, big night. So anyway, the Wren, that was my thing growing up. I loved the Wren. And every year I did the Wren. And then later on, I never got to the point where you would go to the pubs and do it. I think in my last year I went to the pubs once, and you'd make loads of money there because people were in the pub and they had money, and they were very generous after a few drinks. So of course I probably would have pursued that had I stayed on, but I think I went once and realized that it was made so much money. But I always remember my older brothers and sisters went to a ball every St. Stephen's night. It was called the Hunt Ball. And they had friends who owned horses and had stud farms. So they had very snooty friends. They were, I guess, lucky enough to have some snooty friends where they could learn to ride horses. And then they got invited to these beautiful balls, and they would get dressed up. The long cocktail dress, and the lads would wear what we called monkey suits. So it was tuxedos with the little bow ties. And I can just remember them all getting dressed up and going out and saying, "Oh my God, I can't wait till I'm old enough to do that." And I got to go to one hunt ball before I left. So that was pretty exciting. That was a really good day. And that's the day that my aunts and uncle on my mother's side came down, and she had a blast that day. That was her day. I always remember she laughed a lot on that day. And I can see them all sitting there, and I guess she really rarely drank, but I guess that day she would enjoy like a Bailey's or something. And I can remember her mother sitting beside her, and that's when I would sing for them, and and my uncle would do magic tricks for us, and so that was a really good memory day for me, really good, yeah.
Do you ever do anything for St. Stephen's Day now?
Well, for a couple of years, we haven't done it. We've missed the last 2 years. My husband and I will throw a St. Stephen's Day party here with our friends. A couple of our friends that we hung out with down in New York, we still are in great contact with them. And we had started that when we lived in Queens. We always had a bit of a party on St. Stephen's Day, and we'd all get together. And it was the leftover food from Christmas Day. We never did anything like sang or anything like that, but we just all got together. And it's kind of happened, I want to say maybe 3 times over the last 6-7 years since we've been here. And it's been, a lot of the times because people had to go to work the next day, or some people had to work on Stephen's Day because it's not a holiday here. Everybody doesn't stop for work. So it didn't always work out. So it's kind of like fading a little bit for me now. And I'm kind of sorry that I've let it fade, I think here in Fairfield, some people carry on that tradition here in the Gaelic Club. I see, I don't know what they call it now here on St. Stephen's Day. They call it something else. It's not the wren, mummers. And so I guess it's the same idea. So different parts of the country probably called it different things.
Right.
And because we'll say this to a lot of people that we've met over here, and they're like, no, we didn't, I never heard of the wren. Never heard of the wren. And the other thing that we had that people didn't have in the towns, we had Santi's bird, which was a robin. And the robin was there to check that you were in bed before 8 o'clock every night before Christmas. And without fail, we would scurry up that stairs because, watch out, here's Santi's bird, so you'd all scurry up and you'd be asleep, you'd have your eyes shut. And apparently, when we came out here, I realized that was something that our parents derived up. I don't know if it was even a local thing. I think it might have been just their thing, but we had Santi's bird come to our house at Christmas.
Good idea.
We were very lucky. So, yeah.
Okay, now a couple times you've alluded to your husband.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about your
Okay,
husband?
I was waiting. I was holding back until you asked. His name is Aaron McNicholl, and becoming a little bit of famous in his own right up here in the Gaelic Club. We'll get into that in a little bit. But Aaron is, we met in Queens when I was working in the Old Fetch, and I was bartending there, and he came in one night, Halloween, all drenched, pouring out of the heavens, asked me for a drink, and immediately I says, "Are you from Tyrone?" And he says, "I am. How did you know that?" And I had this thing, I guess I'd met a lot of Tyrone people at the time and was very tuned into their accent, and I had this thing where I was able to pick up accents very easily and say where they were from. I don't know if I still have that gift, but anyway, so we clicked that night, and he might tell you a different story now if he was sitting here about how we met and all the rest. He has this little story that he tells, and if you interview him, I'll wait until you interview him so that he can tell his side of the story.
No, tell me yours.
Oh, no, it's the same story, but he always stretches it a little bit. I was dating a fella at the time, and we were about to break up, and I knew it was coming. So I knew it had to come, that I was getting ready to break up this guy. This guy was not good for me, and I was just waiting for the moment that it was going to happen. And so Aaron came in the week of the time I had been thinking I'm gonna break up with him on Saturday, and I had been thinking this all along. So Aaron comes in and he says, I don't know if it happened the same night. I think it happened the following week. He says to me, "Would you go out with me?" And I says, "Will you ask me at the weekend, because I'm going out with the fella and I'm going to break up with him." So, of course, his story has a different perspective. It's like I was blown away by this guy that I says, "Oh, I'm going to break up with this fella because I just met this really nice man." So it was a little different. So that's the story. So we of course were on a rebound in a way from he'd just had a serious relationship that had broken up, and then I had just broken up with this guy, and we had made this decision that we were not serious. And so we went through about 2 years of saying every weekend that we were going to break up. So every weekend we would break up. Okay, we are not serious. Remember, we said we're not serious, so we would break up. So finally, we went home to Ireland. Actually, we packed up our bags. We sold everything. It had been, every Irish person that comes here, I think, at some stage is always saying, "I'm going home, I'm going home." And we did that for many years. And so it was 1990. Gosh, let me think. I had said I started in Sloan Kettering in 1990, but maybe I was wrong with that because I'd been working there. I'd only been working there a short time. I'd only been working there maybe a year, maybe even 8 months when I gave my notice in. And so we packed up everything. I sold my car. I learned how to drive here. When I was 19, my uncle got me, he started to teach me, and then he got, got me out and got lessons. And when I was 19, I owned a brand new car. And I think to this day, my mother has never owned a brand new car. And at 19, I owned, can you imagine? Like, that was the biggest American dream right there. But I sold that car. It was a Duster. I sold it when I went back home. I had all my PA, you know, my sound equipment for the gigs that I had been doing. I sold all that for dirt cheap, you know. Furniture, everything that we had, we sold it off. And we went back to Ireland to live, Aaron and I. And we lived in Dublin for 6 months. And of course, you go back home and it's never the same as when you left. I mean, the people have changed. You don't have the same friends. Your family have all moved on. Everybody's doing different things. And it wasn't the same when we went home. And of course, we missed so many things from here. We missed our friends terribly from over here. We'd had this really nice group of friends that we did everything together with. And we missed them terribly. I missed them so much, you know. And I went home to Ireland and got a bartending job and didn't go back into like an office job because then, you know, Ireland is one of the most highly educated workforces in the world, and I didn't go to college. Now, during the time that I grew up, there wasn't many people that went to college, but then it started to become a trend where, you know, either you left or you went to college, you got your degree, university. And so I went back with very little training of any sort, you know, really. So I went back and started bartending. And maybe I would have eventually gone and gotten an office job somewhere. But I missed my old, nice, cushy office job in New York. And not that it was cushy, I worked hard, but you left at 5 o'clock every day. And, you know, you 9 to 5, and you had your 3 weeks vacation at the time. And got a nice salary, and then you go back to work in a bar, and over there they make you work double shifts every day. So you started at 10 and you didn't finish till like midnight. By the time you closed up and cleaned everything, and you cleaned everything, not like here. The bar here, I don't know if it's the same in the Gaelic Club, but the bars that I had worked in over here, somebody came in and cleaned for you. Here, back over there, you did all that. So it was really hard work, and you got paid very little. You didn't get tips, so it was like a complete switch compared to bartending over here. Because over here you made a lot of money bartending, and you went in from, you know, maybe 7 till 4 in the morning, of course. Anyway, a long job. Either way you cut it, it was a long job. So anyway, I stayed there 6 months, and I really missed it here. And I had a very unusual situation happen to me one day. I got a call. When I went back home, I told my job that, and my intention was that I was going to go home and start nursing. I was going to go to school for nursing, and because it was something I had always wanted to do. And when I went home and I started talking to friends who had become nurses, they were like sharing what the job was really like, and they said, "Don't do it." So I made the decision not to do that. And when I had left my job, they were sad that I was leaving, and I told them this, and I said, you know, but if I take the nursing and I come back for summers, maybe I can do some work here in the summer, you know, temping or whatever. So one day I got a call from my old boss saying, did you start nursing? Are you thinking of coming back? And I had gotten a call earlier that morning that my cousin was dying here. My very, very close cousin was dying, and she died of AIDS. Her husband and herself both had AIDS. I actually got the call to say that her husband was dying. He'd 2 weeks to live, and that she was sick with it as well. So it was like one of those really unusual things where he gotten a blood transfusion or something, and this tragedy happened. And I was so close to her. She was 24, I think, when she died, so young. And I mean, I was just devastated by the whole thing. And I had gotten that call that morning that Mossy was dying and he had 2 weeks to live, and that she was really sick. And the same day I got the call from my boss saying, are you thinking of coming back? We'd love to have you back. So I hung up, and I made the decision that day that I was meant to come back here, you know. And I came back. I was back within a couple of weeks. And Aaron stayed on for a little while in Ireland, came back maybe a month later. So I came back and started working at Sloan Kettering. And that was the start of my long, fabulous career there. And Aaron came back a month later and proposed to me, I think, the night he came back. So that was the start of our life together. We've been together now, it'll be 15 years this October. No, 14 years this October. And 14 years. We've been in Connecticut 7 years. We bought our house up here in Norwalk 7 years ago. And we've two boys, Dara and Gavin.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice story.
Yeah.
Now, Aaron is from the north.
He's from the north. He's from Dungannon, County Tyrone.
Have you been to his
I've been there, and so that brought me back to that story that I was telling you earlier. I'd never been the north ever. People would often go to the north when I was growing up. They would go up right over the border. They would go up there and do their shopping because it was much cheaper up the north than it was in the south. And it was worth it for people to go up there and buy like their TVs or their Christmas shopping. And they would go up there. So I think my family may have been up there at some point. I'd never been across the border.
What's it like?
So my first experience was when I had met Aaron, and we went over to Ireland on our holidays one year, and I was going up the north to meet his family, and he was driving, and I fell asleep in the car, and I remember when we got to the checkpoint, I can remember waking up with a gun pointed to my head. That was my first experience with the north, and I mean, he may have explained all this to me and all the rest, but it was still such a huge shock to wake up with that gun. You know, it was, the window was closed, but it was through the window. And the same on his side. And then they were checking, you know, for his license and where are you going, sir? Where are you coming from? What have you got in the car? Who's that? What's your family name? Da, 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 da. And so then visited his family, and at that time, it's not the same today, but at that time, the army were very much in full view of everybody all the time. So if you walked down to the shops to get something, or you were going out that night, you know, to a dance or whatever, the army were all over the streets, down in their hunkers with the gun. The whole way that you walked, they followed you. And these were young kids. They were young soldiers. I'm talking 16, 17-year-olds, you know, babies holding these guns. And it was really scary. I can remember like thinking, it just felt so wrong. It just felt so violating to be in that environment all the time. It didn't faze Aaron one bit because he grew up with that. And I can remember being in the kitchen one day in his house. That same holiday I went home, and I looked at their back window in their kitchen, and there's the army in their backyard, their back garden. They're just meandering through on their way somewhere or looking for something, and I looked at it and I see them back there, and I'm going, oh my God, this is the way they lived, you know? And they lived with people bursting into their houses in the middle of the night, waking them up, looking for somebody. Not, you know, Aaron's family was not connected at all. They don't believe in that one. You know, they don't believe as hard as it must have been to have grown up with that and not made you bitter. They're like so the opposite. You know what I mean? They're just nonviolent people and would never support it in any way. Of course, big believers in the Republic of Ireland and what all that stands for, but not the means by the way the IRA have fought. And anyway, you know, Aaron tells me stories of his father being put into jail for internment. And that was, I could not imagine that. They just put boys who had turned between a certain age, I think like 18 to 26-year-olds or something, were put into jail for a year just because they were Catholic. They had nothing to do with the Republican Army, nothing whatsoever. You know, they were just put in jail. And it was to deter them from ever desiring, you know, this is what you're in store for if you get involved. And, you know, they were put in jail for a year and then they were set free. And I'm sure a lot of them wanted to join the IRA after it, but, you know, Aaron's father was not of that sort. So it just didn't happen for them. But their life was so different. I mean, they grew up listening to bombings all the time and friends being killed. And here I am living an hour down the road from them, oblivious to it, seeing stuff on the news, but thinking it's in another country, you know? But here it is, an hour from my house. And so we were so removed from that. We were so unaffected by it growing up. And it's really sad that,
Right.
that probably peeves my husband off because they were so immersed in it and their lives were so affected by that. Walking home from school, he'll tell you stories where, the Protestants would throw stones at them and, harass them on the way home from school, and they didn't feel safe all the time. It was nothing to him. When he talks about it now, it was nothing. But I can't imagine my kids going through that now. I just can't imagine them coming out okay from that.
And does Aaron tell your children about?
Yeah, he tells a little bit. He tells stories, but it's like any kid growing up. Your father telling you stories. Oh, I walked to school with no shoes on in the rain and the snow, and you go, yeah, 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 yeah. And I try that with my kids. When they complain and I ask them to clean their room up or do this or do that. I mean, they have to do so little, and they complain, and I say, look, I'll send you out to milk the cows or pick the potatoes. And they go, yeah, 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 yeah. I try and like tell them how it was, and they're like, they don't care. They don't want to hear it. So I think they kind of have the same feeling when Aaron starts bringing up stuff, although there's a little bit of, it's a different telling of a story. It's almost like a movie. So they're starting to become more interested in it now, I think. Um, I think the eldest boy, Dara, he's huge into history, loves, history, American history, Greek history, and I could see him being really into the Irish history. So now whenever Aaron talks about it, his ears perk up more. And I think they're more now getting into a stage where they're more aware of St. Patrick's Day. It's a big deal now. They go to school and they're dressed in their green, and they're more aware of, they're becoming more aware of their heritage now, and I think they're getting more curious. So now might be the time to start really, feeding them more of that information. But I've only noticed that recently, that they're not blowing us off as easily as they used to with that stuff.
And how about in your home? Do you keep Irish traditions?
Yes and no. It's very strange how, in some ways, we're very proud of our upbringing, and then in other ways we push out a lot of um, things that Irish Americans would just relish. I think I'm more steeped in the Irish heritage than my husband is, because I grew up with the love of music, and I always loved Irish traditional music, and I still love it. I just adore it. I adore listening to it. I adore watching it. I adore watching dancers. I've always loved that. And my mother was that way. She loved it. My sisters and brothers never had what you call a love for any of that traditional stuff, because we grew up in a different era. We grew up with pop music, in the 60s. My sisters wore the bell bottoms with the flowers, and anything, I suppose, Irish traditional at that time was not cool. God forbid you did Irish dancing at that time. Or you played the tin whistle or the accordion. It was like diddly, they'd call it diddly eye music, but I loved it. And I never really played Irish traditional music until I came here. Not that I couldn't play, I only played guitar. I never took tin whistle or the accordion or fiddle or anything like that, even though now looking back, I would have loved it. But you didn't kind of brag that you loved it, because you were very uncool if you loved it at that point in time. And now over here, my sisters and brothers are still the same way. They're not lovers of, my sister in Boston really is not into traditional music. Her husband is more interested in it. And my sister, who lives in Stratford, just up the road, is just so unremoved from it. I mean, I don't think she probably went out the door St. Patrick's Day and probably didn't eat anything that was remotely Irish or do anything that was remotely Irish. Now she will when her young guy gets a little bit older. But our tradition, I guess, might have been, because I've always played music. I've always played music on St. Patrick's Day, so that's my connection with it. And I would still, have the corned beef and cabbage now, and the Irish soda bread, things like that. And we've started to give our children that now around St. Patrick's Day. but we wouldn't have done that, years ago. We've only started to do that more now. We've become more aware of it. I'm very proud of it now, and we're starting to see the children react that way too. That where they're really proud of where they've come from. So it's been a voyage getting to where we are now about where we came from, you know. So I think our kids are becoming more and more Irish or Irish American now. And my youngest son is playing the violin. He's playing it classically through his music teacher at school. But my goal is, when he's got it down at school, that I'm going to start bringing him into the Irish traditional sessions and get him into playing Irish music. That's my goal for him. He doesn't know that yet. I'm bribing him every step of the way. But I'd love it if the older son would play something, but he's not interested. But Gavin, I hope will, he's not given up the violin ever. He, I keep telling him that, and my hope is that he'll play Irish traditional music with it.
Have you taken them home?
Yeah, we've gone home many times with them. It's usually every second year because it's quite expensive now to go home, But